Welcome back, everyone. Pal Ponder All Weather here. In this update, we've got several rounds of severe storms in the coming days, with a ridge really starting to build for those areas out west. Then a cool front will really set up shop across the middle part of the country. That will dive southbound, setting up those mesoscale convective systems that will propagate from northwest to southeast. Then, as we head into next weekend, a more dominating ridge of high pressure will start to build, especially across the middle part of the country. That will help lower some of the pressures underneath in the Gulf of Mexico, and tropical moisture will start to build, especially as we head into next weekend. But going forward, here's the setup for today. We've got a ridge of high pressure that's really going to be locked and loaded across much of the west and the desert southwest. In fact, some of those areas, especially like in Vegas and stuff, they've already experienced 110, 111 degrees, some of the earliest, hottest temperatures on record that they have seen. But the middle part of the country, we are going to be seeing an area of low pressure form right along a little bit of a cool front. That's going to set the stage for a convergence zone and more storms for those areas across Kansas, Oklahoma, getting into the Texas Panhandle, and eventually into Missouri tonight with very heavy rain. So if you are new to the channel and like detailed weather breakdowns, hit the subscribe button and you're in. You get all my daily content on this channel. So going forward, here's the setup for today. We do have an enhanced risk for severe storms for those areas east of Denver. I think this is where things get going about 4 o'clock this afternoon and propagate down the northwest flow right along the convergence zone where this cool front lies. But the initial stage will be some big time hail producers and high wind producers, especially for those areas in eastern Colorado, back into Goodland, as well as into the Dodge City region, and then further south into the Amarillo area. And then as we get into the overnight hours back into Wichita, and eventually, I think this all ends up into Missouri with some very heavy rain into the overnight hours. In fact, they do have a moderate risk for excessive flash flooding into the overnight hours. But the main concern with the initial setup is going to be a larger hail event with that hatched risk. That definitely implies more of those hailstones in that 2 to possibly 3-inch variety, especially after we get after that 4 o'clock time frame. But the wind producers are going to be pretty prevalent tonight. The atmosphere is calling for significant winds across this region, upwards to 60, 70. You're going to be seeing at times some severe thunderstorm warnings with destructive tags on above 80 miles an hour is definitely not out of the question, as they will swing across, especially in the heat of the afternoon and getting into the early evening time frame, and eventually winding down as more of a heavy rain threat, especially as you get further into Kansas, and especially for those areas into Missouri. But going forward, here's the setup. I think things get going around 4 o'clock, but especially as we head into that 7, 8 o'clock time frame, we are going to be watching that mesoscale convective complex of storms really propagating across those areas of western Kansas. And then we're also going to have some isolated bubblers starting to form again for those areas in and around the Springfield, St. Louis region. That's when we could start the origination of some of that very heavy rain and some larger hail even for them. But I think eventually all this is going to come with a 1-2 punch in the overnight hours, with just some very heavy rain and a lot of high winds. It's pretty concerning right now, especially if you look at some of these wind gusts where these rib start to show up in some of these high resolution guidances. Yeah, those could be pretty significant, folks. Things get going into eastern Colorado, but especially ramping up into Kansas. And if that mesoscale convective complex of storms really starts to bow out and starts to take that bow-shaped segments, that's when we can start to see some of those 70, 80 mile per hour destructive tags on those severe thunderstorm warnings. So I won't be ruling out later on tonight getting some of those 80, if not some very isolated, maybe even some 90 mile per hour wind gust, especially for those areas into central Kansas. And that'll eventually swing into northern Oklahoma. And I think things do start to calm down once they hit Missouri. And then I think it more or less turns into a strong wind event, but very heavy rain event as well. So overall, if you break it down, over the next 24 hours, here's where that cool front lies, and it's right along the cool front. That will be the conversion zone, the lift mechanism that overturns the atmosphere coming off eastern Colorado, especially there into Kansas, getting its act together. You can see the deeper, darker reds really starting to show up across Missouri. That's where we could see some 2, 4, maybe even some 6-inch totals overnight. So likely flash flood watches in place and some flash flood warnings unfolding into the overnight hours. So definitely be on high alert. And then for tomorrow, that cold front's going to take its sweet time. So we've got the ridge of high pressure building across much of the west. And as the cool front sags, that'll bring the instability a little bit further south, just a little bit further south. And I think that's where pretty much where the rain aspects are going to be setting up shop, especially as we get into Sunday. So for Sunday, we're still going to see the origination of storms highlighted near the Denver region. Those will fishtail further south because the cool front will sink further south, puts the rain prospects further south back into Oklahoma, getting into portions of Arkansas by then, as well as into North Texas, but especially towards the Panhandle again, out in West Texas. That's where they could see the stronger thunderstorms and some of that heavier rains heading into that Sunday time frame. And overall, for those 24 hours on Sunday, this is where the rain prospects would be. So they would likely move out of Kansas and Missouri by then and pushing into Oklahoma through Arkansas, right along this boundary where that cool front lies in northern Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, back into the Carolinas, with the heavier rain prospects back into portions of Colorado, but especially in eastern New Mexico, the Texas Panhandle, and West Texas. And those would sneak further south as you get into the overnight and then morning time frame heading into Monday for those areas even further south. So by the time we get into Monday, this is where the cool front will lie. So likely more of a stationary front by then, but draped across Wyoming, there in eastern areas of Colorado, into the Texas Panhandle, likely around the I-20 corridor within the Dallas-Fort Worth region, getting into East Texas, and those areas swinging further south into Louisiana, back into Mississippi, and eventually heading into Florida. And that's where things really start to slow down, and if not stall out there in the Gulf of Mexico. It's kind of draped across this boundary, and where the cold front is, that's where the instability in the conversion zone will likely be to overturn the atmosphere and setting up some of those stronger storms, especially as you're getting into Monday by then, highlighted across this region with some of that very heavy rain. And as you can actually see it on the surface map, so much of the west stays dry under that ridge of high pressure. It's where you just kind of have that a kink in the ointment right there along the boundary where that cool front lies. So much of the upper Midwest and much of the Great Lakes will be on the actual cooler side, while much of the West is going to be well above average. And then, of course, you have the instability across the middle part of the country, where that cool front will likely go. So by the time we head into Tuesday, it's all about these short waves. So we've got several areas of disturbed weather. The main one is really highlighted across much of Kansas again. Oklahoma and North Texas going to have yet another mesoscale convective system moving off the continental divide there and setting up shop with another MCS type system with more wind producers and very heavy rain producers. We'll have a low pressure center mainly kind of highlighted just off the coastal areas of Virginia. We'll have another little vorticity really highlighted across northern portions of Minnesota and as well as into Wisconsin. So there's a couple spins in the atmosphere, if you will set the stage for those showers and some isolated thunderstorms. But the main complex is this convective complex across the middle part of the country with another mesoscale convective system. We've seen so many of these. Something you're going to see today in Kansas. We're going to be seeing another one Going into Tuesday night, especially for those areas into Oklahoma and in North Texas, it could be another strong wind event and very heavy rain event, likely seeing more flash flooding with this area. But you can see some of the guidance is starting to hint at some tropical moisture, starting to build for those areas into the Bay of Campeche, right along into the Yucatan. And it's going to take its sweet time because we're going to be, mainly focused across the U.S., but also we're going to be highlighted across the, the Gulf of Mexico, because we are going into hurricane season. So, on Tuesday night, this is where the convective complex will be moving across from northwest to southeast for those areas into the Oklahoma City region, Lawton, those areas across Wichita Falls, into North Texas, back into West Texas. We'll likely see another squall line, if you will, with stronger winds and heavy rains in the overnight hours, and pick up from, fairly significant totals again. We'll likely see more flood warnings across this region. So do expect more heavy rain across some of these areas that's just been inundated, as of late. But going into Wednesday, I think it changes a little bit because, man, the tropical moisture just is alive and prevalent, and it reaches all the way well north. I mean, gosh, especially into the Dakotas by then, with those middle 60s reaching all the way up into Nebraska, and that puts the instability further north for those areas into South Dakota, North Dakota, especially like the Sioux Falls region, the Aberdeen region, even Grand Forks will likely set up the severe storms as we head into Wednesday afternoon. But if you break it down further than that, eventually this ridge of high pressure that's been really kind of been really locked over Mexico. It's been teasing those areas further southwest and getting into those areas further north. I think eventually it's going to finally win out as we head into next weekend, and that ridge of high pressure will be starting to build, especially across the middle part of the country, and likely bringing the hottest temperatures so far this season. We could be looking at a cross-country heat ridge starting to build across the desert Southwest, building across Texas, much of the plains, much of areas of portions of the Ohio Valley here. That will put a squash on a lot of activity highlighted across the middle of the country, but also set the stage for kind of the ridge over troubled waters. Whenever you have a ridge over the top, that helps lower some of the pressures underneath in the Gulf of Mexico. And that's exactly what we see. It's one of those areas that we'll just have to watch. And in June, it takes a long time to kind of fester. They talk them Central American gyra type atmosphere, where just kind of this conglomerate of thunderstorms can kind of congeal down there into Central America, the Bay of Campeche, as the ridge will start to move overhead, lower the pressures a little bit further underneath. And we'll be watching this, especially as we get into next weekend and early the following week. We might be looking at some sort of tropical, at least moisture starting to move in closer to the deep south, by then, getting into that 18th, 19th, say maybe 20th time frame. So guys, I appreciate you guys watching. Make sure you do hit the like button. Make sure you hit the subscribe button, and catch me next update while I protect you before and after the storm.